Hey, Lisa Neller here with My Golden Life. And today I have a special guest named Daniel Aaron with the Art of Vibrant Living. And I invited Daniel here today to help us understand how spirituality affects our lives and the importance of it. And I'm not going to read his bio. So we're going to start with Daniel's background. He's going to give us a little story, tell us how he, a little bit about himself, and then also how he developed his own spiritual practice. And then we'll get into some more dialogue there. Sound good, Daniel? Welcome.
Thank you. That sounds fantastic. It's
All
great to be
right.
here with you. It's an honor.
Well, thank you for being here. All right. So if you would, Daniel, just give us some background. Tell us, you can start where you're from, whatever you want to, wherever you want to start would be great.
Okay, cool. Happy to. I was born in Maine in the United States. I'm a full-blooded maniac. And I grew up in a standard dysfunctional family. Some love, a lot of pain, a lot of yuckiness. And somehow, though, I knew from an early age, there must be more to life than this. And as a kid, I was fat, I was shy, I was depressed. However, I made it through childhood. I got into my 20s and I wasn't happy, but I was doing a little better. And even though in my whole childhood I grew up kind of against religion, didn't make sense to me. My parents had abandoned it. And in my mid 20s, I had an experience that changed everything for me, which could be called a divine whack upside the head, a godly 2x4, a spiritual awakening, Kundalini rising, or you could say going crazy, breakdown to break through. And it was a beautiful, amazing experience where I went from not really believing in anything beyond the human form, straight past believing, all the way to knowing there is a higher power. And at that point, I tasted oneness, human potential. It was blissful and it was horrible because I didn't understand what was going on. I certainly couldn't communicate about it, and I didn't know how to live it. And at the same time, my old life, my old worldview was like blown up. So very disorienting. When my feet came back down to the ground, I didn't have these words then, though what I understood later was motivating me was I got to figure this out, how to be spirit in human form. And what it led to is me getting obsessed with personal and spiritual development. So that was about 30 years ago that occurred, and my obsession has remained.
Wow. Okay. So, would you say you went down a rabbit hole, or would you say that you just sort of evolved over time, over study, over the experiences that you invited into your life, or that sort of came to you as you were going forward?
Yeah. Well, I'll give a response and see if I got to your question well. There's kind of two schools of thought and experience when it comes to awakening or realizing the truth of who we are. And this isn't not like truth with a capital T, it's just one way of looking at it. And there are people who have what you could call like sudden awakenings. Sometimes they're called spontaneous enlightenments or walk-ins, like Byron Katie or Eckhart Tolle might be modern examples of that. And then there
Yes.
are others of us who kind of slowly peel away layers, slowly get to more and more freedom, love, light, peace. And for me, it was kind of a combination because for a moment, I experienced complete complete oneness and bliss, right? And though then it disappeared, like the veil came back down. And through my life, I've been blessed to have many more of those experiences. They in Buddhism they call that satori, right? A glimpse of enlightenment is the way it's translated sometimes. Um, However, every time I come back to sort of normal human existence and say, okay, where's my work? What else do I need to be aware of, let go of? What else do I need to generate? So did that respond to your question?
It really did in such a beautiful way, because I love the Byron Katie story, like boom, all of a sudden she's depressed, she goes from depressed to being enlightened in a matter of minutes or hours or whatever that was. And then, yeah, for a lot of us, it's a much slower path. And I don't think I've even experienced what you've experienced. So I don't ever feel like I've had one of those moments of enlightenment, like where I felt like I was one with the universe, or like I knew God, or like I was all of a sudden at peace with life and death and all of that. And my personal development started long before my spiritual development. I went to church as a kid, but we weren't what you would call, like, my family wasn't like evangelical believers where we, you know, uh, were like super into the church and all of that. But I started out in direct sales, and because I was in direct sales, there was a ton of personal development that went along with that. And that was in my early 30s to early 40s. And then it wasn't until my early 40s that I, got spiritual. And that it's not that I had never been seeking before. I had, but like at one point, and I think I told you this in a previous conversation, I became a born again Christian and a yogi at the same time. And so I was, walking the two lines of Eastern and Western philosophy, excuse me. And I never, like I said, I grew in both of those. I did not like the dogma of the church, but I did like the messages that I would hear in scripture and read in scripture. And I loved Bible study and things like that, and equally loved studying yoga philosophy and learning different ways to think. So I feel like I'm a very open-minded person. I just don't feel like I've ever had that aha thing. Which is probably the case for most people. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Probably. I mean, it's so hard to say because none of us know anybody else's experience. And sometimes these things are scary and challenging and confront us in ways that maybe we don't want to share with other people about. It can be like any kind of spiritual awakening can be extremely disorienting. And I think for all of us, part of human nature is like if something's uncomfortable or unknown, there's a part of us that says like, oh, I don't know if this is okay. Maybe I better not talk about it.
Yeah. Or maybe they go, they go into a belief system that they, really attach to, and then that's all they become, like some of the dogmatic people in the church and other religions, where it's my way or the highway, or it's our way or my God's better than your God kind of thing, which I find to be really sad, but it is a thing that is out there. But I have an important question for you. How can cultivating a spiritual practice, like let's say someone listening doesn't really have one, or they don't even know what we're talking about, how can a spiritual practice impact men and women? I mean, my audience is primarily women in the second half of life, but considering the second half of life, how can cultivating a practice be helpful and impactful?
How can it not? But let me back up and give a little more thorough response though, which is it's an interesting piece for me because now about 30 years of doing this kind of work for myself and with clients and students, I have off and on moved away from the words spiritual practice or meditation because the two things, one, they're used so often that people have different ideas of what that means, right? For years, I didn't want to use the word practice because I had this conception that practice is for something else later, and I'm choosing to be present, right? So the words can be complicated, and the way I think of it mostly now, and I'm fine with those words. Like what's important is that we give context to it. So for me to give a little context for spiritual practice, it's well, here's the way I put it. I have experienced very thoroughly and have seen it over and over again that what we do typically in the first part of the day, it doesn't have to be, is so valuable and important because it's a way of creating who we are. And one way of looking at the human experience is we are at least two creatures. We are human spirit and we are human animal, right? We are both of those. So the human animal part, we don't have to do much about that. It's a 2 billion-year-old brain and we are hardwired for survival. And so we tend to go into fight or flight and divide things into good and bad and get reactive. And the human spirit part, though, is invincible and eternal and runs on love and joy and is up for the adventure. The human spirit's like, no change. Change is dangerous. So, for us to cultivate the spiritual aspect of us, and by cultivate, that might mean just like pay attention to, right? Just like a relationship with our beloved or our children, it grows when we say, "Hey, I'm here, I'm attentive, I'm present with you." And the rewards of being in touch with the spirit part of ourself, they're innumerable, right? And if we invest some time every morning into creating who we are, what we're doing is, in the language I use, we are creating our supreme self, right? We all got the part that's afraid and lazy and doubtful and gets angry. That's part of being human. This other part that's confident and loving. And we all know when we live in that, when we touch into that, everything in our life changes. It's like that saying, last thing I'll say, it's like that saying that all boats rise at high tide. So if we cultivate that part of ourself, the supreme self part, every aspect of our life, all of our relationships rises up to a greater level of vibrancy and joy and love.
I love the word cultivate. It's one of my favorite words. It's like tending to your garden, right? Taking care, like getting rid of the weeds and feeding and nurturing the soil and all of that. So I love that word. I think for myself, I think of the word practice for me mainly comes from yoga because I have a yoga practice, and it's like the reason they call it a practice is because you I don't even know how to say it. It's just like if you keep coming back to the mat, you're just going to keep learning more, and you're going to deepen your spiritual experience and physical probably. But so that's what I think of a practice. So let me ask you, well, first of all, can you name something an example where your spiritual life made a difference? Like a before and after. Like before I had this experience, I was here, and after I had this experience, I felt this.
I think so. We'll see.
There's probably many, but you could just pick one. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, there are many. The first thing that comes to mind is I had an experience maybe 7 years ago where overnight, essentially, I lost everything, which meant my country of residence, my business, my income, all the money I had. Suddenly I went into debt. We lost our home, all our stuff. and worst of all for me and my daughter, our dog. And and I would love to tell you that when that happened, I was so enlightened that I said, "Oh, this is perfect. What a blessing." Not quite. I struggled. It was challenging. Even though in my head I knew that was true, right? I knew that everything's happening for me. However, my experience was, "Oh man, this is hard. I don't want this." I was attached to all those things. And in the ensuing months, especially the first few months of that, when I was so disoriented and experiencing such a level of confusion and loss and even despair at times, the thing that was most helpful to me was spiritual practice, right? For me to every morning, pray, meditate, do yoga, connect to the higher self. I have 100% certainty that that cultivated in me the strength and the mindset to move through those challenging times. And there were many times in that process where I would, quote, finish my practice or sitting on a yoga mat, for instance, and tears would come to me. And I just thought, I'm so grateful that this is part of my life. And for the first 25 years of my life, I didn't know anything about spirituality. I didn't even know there was a thing called spirituality, let alone spiritual practices or yoga or meditation. So I felt so grateful to have that. So
You know,
yeah.
I'm sorry, did I cut you off? Was
No,
there
I just
more?
want to check and see if that, kind of gets to what you're asking.
Yes, yes, because you said you were going through a really rough time and your spiritual practices were helping you through that. And it brought to memory a yoga teacher that I follow. I've taken some of her workshops and she's world renowned. Her name is Desiree Rumbau. And Desiree lost her son. He was 20 years old and he was murdered in the Phoenix area. And she'd already been teaching yoga for probably, I don't know, 15 years by then. And as much as she grieved and talked about what had happened, she always said that, like, if she didn't have her yoga practice, she didn't know how she would have coped with that, because she had a really strong body and she had a really strong mind from her practices and meditation, of course. And I think we underestimate what our bodies can do for us and what our training can do for us when we are faced with a really traumatic life event, so that made a lot of sense to me. What do you think are some of the challenges that women and or men face in developing a spiritual practice as they age, and how could they overcome them?
Well, I think the biggest one is, it's funny, I was with a friend of mine recently, age 72. We were walking on the beach and we paused because he saw a friend of his and they were chatting for a minute. And the guy he was chatting with was maybe also in his 70s, something like that. And they started doing this kind of chat, which is fairly common for people in their 70s or beyond, which is, hey, which part of your health and body is breaking down, right? What are you doing? How are the pains showing up for you? And I heard my friend say, yeah, this is happening. This is happening. It's coming. Those were the words he said. It's coming. And I was like, wow, right? This is like Game of Thrones or something when they say winter is coming, or the devils or whatever they are coming. And so the biggest thing to me that comes to mind right now anyway is that the mindset of I'm on the decline, right? Things are getting worse from here. And I shared with my friend a little bit after I checked in with him if it was okay first, like, hey, is that a belief that's helping you, right? Is that how you want to see yourself and life, right? So I think there can be this mindset like, oh, it's all downhill from here. And spiritual practice a great life requires hope. It requires optimism. It requires the possibility, the mindset that life is getting better. And not only life is getting better, that I have the power and maybe responsibility to create that my life is getting better all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I can relate to that because I'm having my own aches and pains at 66, and I'm really trying hard to just work with it, like this. It's probably no different than a kid breaking his leg, from skateboarding or something like that. It's just like sometimes we got to rehab, we got to rehab and recover and move on, and because we are spiritual beings, we can keep going and growing and learning until the day we die. So, and I do think our attitudes have so much to do with how we feel and how long we live and all of that stuff. So that makes sense. Can you explain the connection between spirituality and finding purpose or meaning in the second half of life?
Well, we'll find out. Let's see. My sense of that is, well, let's go two directions. Let's go first to India, right? And you've spoken about yoga. In Hinduism, there's this concept called dharma, which, loosely, easily translated is like everybody has a life purpose, a unique purpose. And the degree to which we are living that is the degree to which we are fulfilled, right? That we are living our purpose in the world. Even better, I say, let's go to Japan. Japan has this concept called ikigai, right? Which is very similar. However, it goes to another level, which says, okay, in creating, yes, there's our life purpose, our fulfillment. It's what are we good at? What do we love? Right? What does the world need? And what can we be paid well for? Right. So again, with that, one of the challenges I think for a lot of us as we age is there's a common belief or mindset that, okay, well, I've worked this long or I've contributed this much, and now I'm going to retire, right? And I hope I have saved or created or invested enough money to save me through these last years before I die, right? And that's just such a messed up way of looking at life, because then people start to contract and go into scarcity. This other concept, it's a little bit like what I was saying before, in contrast to it's coming. There's a great example from a non-human animal closely related to us, which is the gorilla. And one of the unique things about the gorilla is in their way of being, they live such that they're getting stronger and better and smarter all throughout their lives, right? It's not like this sort of Western concept, which is, okay, here we are, midlife, things are at the peak, and now it's just downhill declining from there. It's just a continually, things are getting better all the time. Right? I got this feeling I wandered from your question.
No, it's okay. I was fascinated. I was like, what? The gorilla does that?
Eh.
Awesome. That's awesome. No, because I think your point is you can just keep growing and learn and stay positive the whole time. And you don't have to get to this point where you're like, it's over. I'm done. I'm done contributing, you know? Okay, let's see. I'm pausing because I'm really trying to think of my question here. What would you suggest? What would you suggest as a start to cultivating spirituality if, let's say, you've gone through most of your life without it? In other words, a lot of people go to church and that constitutes a level of spirituality. And yet I feel like there's always a deeper level. But like, if you could come up with some examples of things that people could do, and you've already mentioned some things, meditation, yoga, that kind of thing. Is there anything else that you could recommend where people can start to cultivate if they haven't really got a practice going?
Yeah, let's see. The first thing that comes to me is it's like we spoke about earlier, the word cultivate, and we know really well that even with plants, if we attend to them, right? If we water them, if we get them sunshine, make sure they have soil, and even people, it's been proven that if we speak to them with love, that fosters growth, right? So anything that we attend to, anything that we appreciate grows. So even even if somebody's doubtful, like I don't know if I have a spiritual part or if there's spirit in me, if we just say from the perspective of, well, if I did, how might I attend to it? And it's like just paying attention in some way, being curious, like what and that might mean prayer, it might mean going to church, it might mean reading scripture, right? It might mean, yeah, any of the ones we've spoken about. It might mean walking in nature, just sometimes saying, what would spirit say to me, right? Being curious and open, and then following what that leads to in the heart, like the feeling of that. Because, you know, the big challenge, I think, around spirituality and this raging debate for centuries now between the mind and reason and spirituality, and part of the separation of church and state is, well, it can't be proven, right? Well, no. But you know what? Most of the important things in life can't be proven or seen, like love, like vitality, right? We just see the fruits of those things. So I think just being curious and following the voices, and voices, that can sound weird. The intuition, the feeling, the heart, what it says about, yeah, what would spirit do? How would it go?
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to add to that, just by giving some examples of what I do for my spirituality. One of the things I do is I listen to a really positive recording on Mind Tracks. It's MINDTRX, which is recorded messages that they actually attend to various parts of your life. So you could listen to one on spirituality, you could listen to one on abundance and money, finance, or your health, or whatever. And so whatever it is you need support in that day, you could plug in your earbuds and listen to this 20 to 25-minute recording. And all it is positive messaging and the truth. It's all, it's not woo-woo weird stuff. It's positive truth stuff, right? So that's one thing I do. And then I usually follow that up with a spiritual reading. And when I say spiritual, it could be a book of poetry, Hafez. It could be just like little short stories. Like if you're familiar with Mark Nepo, the author Mark Nepo, he writes these one-pagers that are really inspirational. And if you just do that like one page a day, it takes you less than 5 minutes, really. That is, to me, that's important. And then the other thing I like to add is the self-study. I think, and this is, self-study, I think, is very important to understanding your own spirit and to learn about how magnificent you are made and how magnificent you are without all the junk that you hear and the beliefs that you have. So anything to add to that? I mean, there's lots of other things. Walk in nature. I love that. That was really, yeah, like there's something about nature that gets people to calm down.
Hmm. Yeah, well, you mentioned poetry, and you mentioned Hafez, one of the mystic poets. Another is Rumi, and he has this beautiful line in one of his poems that there are 1,000 ways to kneel and kiss the ground, which is in a way to say that there are 1,000, a million different ways to connect to one's spirit, the divine, to go beyond the confines of the physical. And I know I was reflecting a little bit more on it, like what was my experience when I had this divine whack upside the head, and I was like in this completely new world. It was like going into Narnia or something. And I was like, what's going on? I don't know how this all works. And so part of what I did then was read some basic books on spirituality. I mean, from Gary Zukav's Seat of the Soul to Neil Donald Walsh, Conversations with God. Um, and and it's funny for me because when I was in college, I studied, got a degree in philosophy and religion, so studied all these different things. It was in my head, and it wasn't until 3 years later that it went from my head. That was a divine whack. I just realized it went boom, and it went boom down into my heart and body. So, again, whatever works, whatever calls to you, and let it evolve.
Yeah. I want to see if you agree with this. The importance of spirituality is that it affects, I'll let you finish the sentence. The importance of spirituality affects your what?
Entire life, every aspect of our being. Right. It's like one way of looking at that is, so if we go to quantum mechanics, quantum physics right now, right, there's been such great development in the science of reality over the last, well, quite a while, but especially over the last 10, 20 years, right? We know that the old matter model, the Newtonian physics, not that it's wrong, yet there's a higher possibility of truth to see the world. And from that perspective, and this is part of what Einstein was on about with, there is the particle and the wave, there is matter and there is energy. Both exist, and it depends entirely on what we are looking for. Reality depends on the observer, what we're looking for with it. And one of the things that we know really well from that is there is many different names, but call it a divine matrix, an energy field, a field of infinite possibilities, ether, a thinking stuff, right? All kinds of teachers and spirits and religions speak about it in a different way. And we know this just intuitively because, right, before, like, think of anything in our lives, right? A relationship, a physical thing, a job. Before that came about, it existed as a concept. Maybe we spoke about it, and it goes from this etherical, energetic realm into greater and greater solidity, greater and greater physicality. So when we attend to spirit, that's the ether, that's the divine matrix. And so when we put energy there, again, it's like the all boats rise at high tide. Every aspect of life is infused with greater possibilities. It's the ultimate superpower. It's the highest leverage.
Yeah. So you're saying we create from that place. Everything that is created from that place. And I see it too as a way to raise your level of consciousness. So you just become more and more aware of things. And a simple example would be someone maybe going to church and they're sitting there listening to the pastor read a passage of scripture and then explaining how it applies to your life, right? It could be something that simple. And then you get to go, oh, I didn't see it that way before. You have an insight, and then your consciousness is raised a little bit. And then also, what was going to be the other example that I had? I can't remember now. It just slipped my mind.
Well, I'm sure it'll come back, and maybe I can toss one other thing in that might be helpful.
Yeah.
One of my favorite lines ever, and specifically from A Course in Miracles,
Mhm.
is that a miracle is a shift in perception, right? And so if we think of it as having greater love, access to spirit, raising our vibration. When we do that, in your example of, a preacher helping someone to get an insight, right? When we have an insight, that's a change in perception. Everything in our life can change from there.
Yes, yes. And it can affect how you relate to your spouse, how you relate to your children, how you relate to people at work, how you manage your mind, all those kinds of things. So, well, I mean, I think that we agree that having a spiritual practice is important and really trying to create it for yourself. Like there's no one right way. Like you said, there's thousands of ways to do this. And you have to find a way that fits with you. So thank you for all your input, Daniel. Where can people find you? Tell us what you're doing. You've got projects, you've got programs. What have you got going on?
Yeah, well, my main service in the world is through what's these days commonly known as coaching, right? I call it vibrant life coaching, business success. I also prefer to think of it a little bit as I work with clients as a creative partner. I help them to access their mastery of creating so that they can create whatever they want in their lives. And oftentimes it's money or clients, physical vitality, health, relationships, all of those things. Um, and and I have lots of videos on YouTube and I put them out on social media a lot. The easiest way to reach me though is just my website, which is my name, Daniel Aaron, Aaron, danielaaron.com.
Fantastic. Any program that you have that you're wanting to promote right now? Any particular thing, or you just find you there and find your programs at your website?
Yeah, thank you. Well, my main focus right now, I work with clients individually, and I have a small group program. And right now, I'm looking for one client to make a 2-year, $85,000 commitment to coaching with me. So that's where a lot of my focus is at the moment.
Okay. All right. So everyone, thank you for listening. Thank you, Daniel, for bringing your wisdom to our show today, to My Golden Life. Again, you can find Daniel at danielaaron, AARON.com, and he's got his programs and offerings there. And again, thank you, Daniel, and we will see you next time.
All right. Thank you, Lisa.
Bet.